All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to another webinar of the Dakhleh Oasis project from this year's series, Echoes from Dakhleh's Past, from prehistory to the modern era. And today we're very much going to the modern era, so this is going to be very exciting. My name is Jorge Coelho Jesus. I have an MA in Egyptology from the University of Manchester, and I'm very happy, as always, to be moderating today's webinar and the webinar series. Please note, as you have heard, that the webinar is indeed being recorded. So if this is your first time joining us, allow me to maybe quickly introduce you to the DOP. The Dakhleh Oasis project is an important initiative that has been carrying out research in Egypt's Western Desert since 1978. Its various projects undertake vital archaeological and interdisciplinary work on the vast timescale of Egyptian, wider Mediterranean, and African history. This work covers a wide range of areas from archaeology, Egyptology, and classics to anthropology, zoology, and geophysics, to name but a few. The purpose of the DOP's webinar series is twofold. So firstly, it seeks to present fascinating information about discoveries made and research undertaken over the years in the Dakhleh Oasis and about life also in the oasis. And secondly, and to support these discoveries and this research, webinar series is connected to the crowdfunding campaign called Towards a Better Future. Now, in the past, the DOP has relied on participating expeditions for its operation. However, with no fieldwork, as you may know, being allowed in recent years, the DOP has become reliant solely on private resources. This means that over 40 years of research and promising studies are at risk due to rising costs. So in light of this situation, the proceeds from this webinar series will go towards the campaign and will support the maintenance of the DOP's dig house in Dakhleh and the publication of research. I will put the link to the campaign in the chat, so do feel free to take a look and to share. Now to today's main event, and what a main event we have planned. The Western Front in Egypt, the Senussiyya in the Dakhleh Oasis, and the Western Desert in 1916 by Olaf Kaper. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this might be the first time we've done such a modern topic in our webinar series. So I'm very, very much looking forward to this. Now, for those who don't know, Olaf Kaper is a professor of Egyptology at Leiden University, specialized in the New Kingdom to Greek and Roman periods. As an expert in the fields of Egyptian religion, iconography, and cultural history, he has particularly specialized in the study of cultural history and the religious landscape in the Dakhleh Oasis, based on extensive fieldwork since 1988, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping rules so that this all goes smoothly. So the lecture will last approximately 45 to 50 minutes, after which time we will have a Q&A session. You can add your questions either to the chat, or I can give you the floor afterwards, depending on how much time we have. Please do keep your microphones and your webcams off during the presentation. If you forget, I will turn them off for you, but please do turn them off so that we don't have any interference, of course, with the great information that our presenter is going to give to us. And this is a necessary plug, of course, for the social media savvy amongst you. Do feel free to post on Facebook, X, Blue Sky, wherever it is you do your social media. We've recently launched Blue Sky, so I'll share our links in the chat for you to follow if you don't already follow us. Right, so without further ado, Olaf, the floor is yours. You can start sharing your presentation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, George. Yes, so I'm going to talk about 1916, which is not particularly archaeology, but it has to do with archaeology, and the whole topic has come forth from my work in Dakhleh Oasis. just a map to start with because I will be talking about Dakhleh Oasis. Here you see it's located right in the center of Egypt. Um, but I'll also talk about Kharga, which is the next oasis to the east, and Farafra, Bahariya, and Siwa. Those are the five great oases of the Western Desert of Egypt, and they will play a role in my talk. I've been working in Dakhla for the Dakhleh Oasis project since 1988, as George mentioned, which is already quite some history. And Dakhla, of course, is a quiet part of the Egyptian countryside, far removed from the modern world, it seems. And I've been working there for a long time. I've been lucky enough to work there for a long time, trying to reconstruct the history of the Dakhla Oasis, and really from the earliest historical periods up to more recent times, where the emphasis has always been on the New Kingdom, the Roman period, some of the major periods of Dakhla history. And in the past, Dakhla has been a far more active center in Egypt than more recent history. And while I was working and living in the oasis, sometimes several months in the year, I was living in Dakhla, and I heard stories also about the recent past. And now and again, there would be mention of British and Australian soldiers that were in Dakhla, and certain roads in the desert that they would have used that were built in the time of the First World War. And I also heard about violence in the oasis, that the British Army once dropped bombs on the village of Mout, the town of Mout. And that story, of course, intrigued me, but I couldn't find any literature about it. It remained a very difficult topic to research. In recent years, I have found time to look into this story and try to find out some more information, which I'm going to share with you now, because it's really an intriguing story, and it involves many of also the antiquities sites of the oases. This is the fortress of El Deir in Kharga Oasis, and it is one of the large late Roman fortresses still standing in the desert. It's important for this story because it contains many graffiti, hundreds of graffiti of British and Australian soldiers in some of the rooms in this fortress, which clearly they occupied in the time of the First World War and also in the immediate aftermath. We see many graffiti there. Here we see a G.T. Atkins mentioned of the Royal Field Artillery, who left his name at the end of June 1917. And there are many such names at Al Deir. And when we look at the neighboring antiquities field of the tombs of El Bagawat in Kharga, many hundreds of names there as well. So there was a British presence in the Western Desert, clearly aimed against the oases. And this takes place in the First World War. Here we see 2 pages from the Illustrated London News, a very popular magazine at the time. And in this spread, full color spread, we see pictures of Dakhla, where the oasis has clearly been under attack, and the British come in to liberate the oasis. And that is really the story that was so intriguing to me. Some of the places here are well known. We see pictures of Mout. We see the top right, Deir Abou Matta, one of the church ruins in Dakhleh, but also Dakhleh Oasis project Jill Bowen has been excavating. This is the village of Kalamoun, one of the lovely villages of the oasis in Dakhleh. And the oases have always been home to traditional farmer communities. And there were also always some Bedouin people present in the oasis. And there was always an important place for Islam, of course, in the oasis. Now, I will be talking about the Senussiyya, which is a tariqah, a Sufi order of Islam. It's a confraternity within Sunni Islam that was founded by Muhammad ibn Ali al-Senussi in the 19th century, in 1837 to be precise. And it was founded in Mecca when this Muhammad al-Senussi who was actually from Algeria originally. He moved to Mecca, he did his studies in various universities, moved to Mecca, and then started his own order, the Senussiyya. He then traveled back from Mecca to North Africa, and he got a wide following in North Africa, mainly among the Bedouin groups in the areas of, well, already in the Hijaz, in around Mecca, but also in eastern Libya and Chad. And he became so popular in Libya, Libyan Bedouin areas, and that his fame also spread to central Sahara and western Sudan. It was quite a fundamentalist order, you could say. It imposed a severe lifestyle on its followers. It tried to move back to the early days of Islam, and music, alcohol, coffee, tobacco were forbidden. It's comparable to the Wahhabiyya, another famous order in Islam, but it also differs in some of its theological tenets and ritual practices. So the Senussiyya was considered quite a fanatical sect by some Western observers. And that this is important, that in the Western press, you will read things like what I found here in Cook's Tourist Handbook for Egypt, that the opinion is as follows. The inhabitants of the oases are very bigoted Mohammedans. Amongst them, I found a fanatical sect who wish to roll back the tide of progress, abolish all the Frankish ideas and customs which have lately gained ground in Egypt, and make Islam once more an intolerant foe to every belief except its own. This is clearly an ethic view, a view of Western observers who do not agree with the tenets of Islam and who want to present this in the most negative light possible. Obviously, there are also very different views from the people actually adhering to this sect, and there were many of those. I show you a map here. This is a map from 1884, where the first time that the spread of the Senussiyya has been charted, and this was done by Henri Duverrier. And who talks about the Senussiyya in these purple areas. So that's mainly Libya, but also Central Africa, Chad, but it also includes the northern coast of Egypt, and also some of the oases are included. He says in 1884 there were about 1.5 million people adhering to the order in 1886. But we know that this is not true. This is a deliberate falsification. He was increasing the numbers because he was presenting the Senussiyya as a serious threat to European interest at that time. In fact, the Senussiyya was not a threat at all. It kept itself away from politics at this time, and it did not pose a threat to anyone. There was a new list made of the Senussi and where it was based in 1902. And this was done by Evans Pritchard, an anthropologist who made a new overview of the time of the greatest expansion. And he spoke about Egypt in particular, where there were 14 mosques and zawiyas, centers along the Egyptian northern coast. It also spread down to the oases. Before I talk about the oasis in some more detail, let me give you another map, specifically of the northern coast oases, but then also including an oasis which is in current day Libya, Jarboub. Jarboub was the center of the Senussiyya from 1856 onwards. And the interesting thing is that at that time, Jarboub was part of Egyptian territory. Egyptian territory was part of the Ottoman Empire, and its border was actually further to the west. Um, the oasis had been uninhabited until the Senussiyya moved there, and they moved there in order to profit from the good connections that Yaqub had with Siwa, with Egypt, but also with the north and the south of Libya. Um, this was the center of the Senussiyya until 1895, when it was moved down to Kufra, which is further down somewhere in this area. But Yaqub always remained an important center. The Senussiyya moved into the western desert of Egypt, the Egyptian oases of Siwa, Bahariya, Farafra, Dakhla, already in the 19th century, and probably in the middle of the 19th century, in the lifetime of Muhammad al-Senussi, the founder of the order. There is no doubt about the large-scale adherence to the Senussiyya in Siwa, Bahariya, and Farafra. Most of the people in those oases already converted, adhered to the order of the Senussiyya. In Dakhla, it's a bit more complicated. Dakhla was bigger, 12 traditional villages and many outlying hamlets. And in Dakhla, it seems to have been a minority among the inhabitants of Dakhla, but still it was present in most of the villages, in 7 of the 12 villages of Dakhleh Oasis. It had a mosque. Um, Let me first show you a picture of Yaqub, because it was the center from which the also life in the oasis in Egypt was largely governed. Certainly the Senussiyya mosques and their adherents. This is a picture from 1941, so long after the events that I'm talking about, but it still existed. And you see the mosque there in the center with a large dome. This is where the founder of the sect, Muhammad al-Senussi, was buried, and it became a pilgrimage center until the entire oasis was destroyed by Muhammad al-Gaddafi. This is a closer view of the mosque. There was also a university there. It housed a large library of some 8,000 books. And this is another view of the mosque, so which included the tomb of Muhammad al-Senussi. The mosque and the center around it was destroyed by orders of Gaddafi in the late 1970s. And then Jarboub was actually Egyptian territory, as I said, until 1925. So after the events of the First World War, it was formally handed over to Italy, which then controlled Libya. And the border then between Egypt and Libya was established at Sollum. So the Senussi order was organized through its institutions, so which is the mosque, but there is a center, a group of buildings around the mosque, and the center is called the Zawiya. Siwa had one of the earliest zawiyas. It's a Senussi institution which has a religious center combined with an educational center, so a school, but it's also a staging post, a hostel for travelers. And it could also be a center for agricultural activities. The size of a zawiya varies enormously, and it depends on the amount of followers and the income they generate. It could vary from only 3 rooms around the mosque to more than 20 rooms around the mosque. So this is Siwa. This is zawiya in Bahariya, the Senussi mosque, which still exists nowadays in Bawiti in Bahariya. It's now under control of the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. And this photo is a bit older, from between 1938 and 49. And many small zawiyas existed in the villages and hamlets of the oasis. And here we see again a picture from the Illustrated London News, where it is called a Senussi monastery. And that's a description which is, well, understandable in a way. because of its multifunctional character. It's not just a mosque, but it includes a teacher, it includes a staff of some people, and it's centered on its religious tasks. This is the successor to Muhammad al-Senussi, Sayyid Ahmed al-Sharif al-Senussi, Sayyid Ahmed in short. He was not a son, the grandson, and he became the head of the order in 1902, and he will play a role in my story when we move to Dakhleh. Um, um, so, first of all, he was the head of the order in 1915 when the political situation became more and more complex. Italy invaded Libya and invaded the territory which was governed by the Senussiyya at that point. And because of the invasion of the Italians, the Senussiyya developed into a resistance movement with a military wing. So they developed a military presence in Libya in order to fight the Italians. The Ottoman authorities from Istanbul were supporting them in this effort and in order to fight the Italians. Then it's important to realize that at that point, already in December 1914, Britain had declared Egypt to be independent of the Ottomans. So the Egyptians were independent. They had deposed the Khedive, and Britain installed a sultan in Egypt who was Hussein Kamel. Then what happens is that the Ottomans do not agree with this independence. They attacked the Suez Canal in February 1915, but they were defeated by the British Egyptian forces. The Ottoman authorities then had the idea to send officers and weapons to the Senussiyya on the other side, on the western side of Egypt. So they would create a second front. The Ottomans at the Suez Canal tried to get in, and the Senussiyya would then be incited to attack Egypt and the British from the west. There were two officers sent to the Senussiyya. These are Ottoman officers, Nouri al-Said and Jafar al-Askari. And they joined Sayyid Ahmed of the Senussiyya with a plan to penetrate Egyptian territory and create alarm and confusion, and tying down as much of the British army as they could. Then it gets complicated because it's a war and the Germans are also involved. The Germans wanted to attack the English, and so they also tried to influence the Senussiyya, and they sent money and weapons to the Senussiyya. But the Senussi, well, they had no interest in attacking Egypt. Egypt was actually delivering food aid to the Senussi at this time. So it was a terribly complex situation where the Senussi were sort of in between forces. And the pressure from the Ottoman side was actually long resisted by Sayyid Ahmed. But in the end, the British were not delivering what they promised, and the Ottomans were actually sending arms as well. And so in the end, he changed sides and went with the Ottomans and attacked Egypt. So Jafar al-Askari, the one on the right, is here shown in Libyan costume, and he started drilling the Senussi troops in Turkish, because that was the military language at that time. And the Senussi troops were prepared for war, and then they went to attack Egypt. In November 1915, it was clear that the British were losing many troops, Gallipoli, for instance, and he sided, Sayyid Ahmed sided with the Ottomans and started some small attacks at border posts. This was not a massive attack like what this photograph suggests, the entire army rolling into over the Egyptian border, but it started with some small attacks. This is a map of the terrain between Sollum, where the border was, where the British army was still stationed, and then, yeah, just outside the map is Marsa Matruh. It's the northwestern part of the coast of Egypt. The small incursions made that the British felt threatened. They couldn't defend themselves there, and so they gave up Sollum and also Buk um, a bit further to the west, and they amassed a large amount of soldiers in Marsa Matruh. So they withdrew to Marsa Matruh. They brought together some 10,000 forces, the British, in order to counter this Libyan incursion. The Senussi army is said to have been 12,000 troops, but this is probably overstated. The army consisted of Libyans, Egyptian Bedouin joined the forces as well, the Bedouins from this particular area. And then there were, of course, the Ottoman officers and a small amount of Ottoman troops. So the directing officers were Ottoman. There were also some Egyptian troops that defected, and that's also interesting because one of these is Mohammed Saleh, an Egyptian who would become one of the generals of the Senussi army. There is first the army of the Senussi is very successful. They go up to Marsa Matruh, and then there is a final battle at Agagia, which is here where the Senussi is then defeated. So this phase of the battles is very exciting for a while, back and forth, but it is settled quite soon, and the British soldiers overcome the Senussiyya. The British soldiers, I say British, but that means they came from all parts of the empire. So there were soldiers from India, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, workers from Malay, Zanzibar. The empire is fighting along. And many of them came directly from Gallipoli, from the battlefields there. The defeat of the Senussi meant some 600 men of the Senussiyya were killed on that side, and Nouri and Jafar, the two Ottoman officers, were captured by the British. And then 2 months later, Sollum is again occupied, and it seems the situation is back to normal, but not quite. The war is far from over. This is only the start. Ahmed al-Sharif, with the Senussi army, goes back from the northern coast and goes down to Siwa. And that's where there was already a Senussiyya presence. There was Sawiyas, and he knew he would be welcome there. So this is a surprising move. Several hundreds of Senussi soldiers and Syed Ahmed go down to Siwa. And there were about 10 Ottoman soldiers with him. And then he doesn't stay in Siwa long, he moves even further to Bahria. And that's, of course, where it becomes tense, because the British now feel that he gets very close to the Nile Valley and that he might go on and invade the Nile Valley from that side. The British observe this from the air. They have aeroplanes hovering over, and they try to drop bombs on Bahria and on these forces, but the Senussi army is mixed with the local population, and they could not be targeted with bombs. The British forces, I give you a close-up. This is Dakhleh Oasis down here with larger here, and this is the Nile Valley at that point. The British are panicking. They amass now about 25,000 men, and they aim to protect the Nile Valley against a possible incursion from Bahria. So they build headquarters at Beni Suef. And then they make a line of blockhouses, like bunkers, from Samalut westwards towards Dakhleh Oasis. So they start building one after the other a series of 6 blockhouses as a defense system. And so they take most of 1916, the summer of 1916, to build this. It was a policy of defense rather than attack. They tried to contain the threat of the Senussiyya. Then the camels finally enter Bahria as part of the defense system of these 25,000 soldiers. There is a camel corps created, the Imperial Camel Corps. This was manned principally by Australians and New Zealanders, and there were 5 companies active in the Western Desert at this time. And it has been described as the backbone of the defense of Egypt from the west. Here you see the Camel Corps in action, arriving in Bahriya, actually, where um, um, they arrive too late. Finally, they've made these blockhouses. The Camel Corps arrives in Bahriya, but Syed Ahmed is no longer there. He has gone further south. Um, um, this is the camp in Bahriya where the British soldiers then set up, and but yeah, the Senussiyya is no longer there. So Sayyid Ahmed moves not to Farafra, he passes through Farafra, goes to Dakhla. Dakhla was the largest oasis with about 20,000 inhabitants at that time. There were several zawiyas, as I've mentioned, in 7 different villages. And yeah, the oasis was not as fanatical as Siwa, Bahriya, and Farafra. That is clear, but still, Sayyid Ahmed was welcomed there by the local governor, and he is offered a house, not in the capital, in Al Qasr, the capital of the oasis, but in the village of Rajda. And the house in Rajda, this is a photograph of the house where he stayed. So just one of the houses in the village of Rajda. Rajda was one of the villages where there was a Zawiya, there was a Senussi presence, but it's interesting that he's not offered a house in the capital, but in Rajda, which is more or less in the central part of the oasis. At the same time, when Said Ahmed moves into Dakhla, which is in April in 1916, the British then move into Kharga. And here you have the 2 oases with blown up. So at the top you see Dakhla and Kharga, and the larger blown up versions are below. The British move into Kharga. They set up camp in mid-April 1916, around the time when Syed Ahmed comes to Dakhla, and they try to do the same thing as they did in Bahriya to protect from incursion, to make sure that the Senussiyya doesn't reach Kharga. Kharga was always a bit outside of Senussiyya influence. They may have been there, but they never set up zawiyas, and there is no evidence that they were ever there. So in Kharga, was easy of access because it was a railway from the Nile Valley to Kharga, and simply the British officers, the British Army could go down by train, and they set up camp in El Deir, which I've shown before, the large fortress. And the main force was housed in the former headquarters, which is close to the village of Munira, somewhere in this area, where there was actually an old office building of the Corporation of Western Egypt that had built a railway to Kharga and then tried to set up agricultural developments which didn't work, and they went bankrupt. But the offices were still there, and so the headquarters of the army, the British Army, became known as Sherika, meaning company, which reflects its origin as the company headquarters. We have some photographs of first of all, this was the El Deir fortress, where there was also a part of the companies was established there in the old late Roman fortress. And we have some photographs of soldiers visiting local antiquities. Here they are in a tomb somewhere. I don't know which tomb this is, and they left their names on some of the antiquities. There were about 1,600 British soldiers in Kharga Oasis in this camp. And the camp was comfortable. There were 2 baths, actually, warm hot springs. A small one for the officers and a large one for the soldiers. This is the large one, which even has a roof and shelter from the sun. The soldiers sat up there, and they organized themselves with the Camel Corps, but also you have at this time introduction of the motor cars, and they are the Ford cars, Model T, which turned out to be particularly suitable to desert travel. They could travel through sand and the rough terrain of the desert. In May 1916, there were 6 light car patrols. That's what they were called, light car patrols, each consisting of 6 Fords, the Model T. And this was the first time that the cars were used, and they helped enormously because with their speedometer, they could create maps, rough maps of the terrain of the desert. And using speedometer readings and compass bearings in combination, they could, in a very simple way, create rough maps. And there were many patrols in the desert between Kharga and Dakhla. This was the way that the British Army tried to stop the Senussiyya by patrolling between Bakharia and the Nile Valley and between Kharga and Dakhleh Oasis. Defensive measures because they felt that the army was not equipped for desert warfare. They did not attack the Senussiyya head on. The main purpose was clearly containment. Sometimes, however, because they also had airplanes, they did send bombs. And so for several occasions, they bombed the oasis of Dakhla, and we know of bombardments of Mut, but they may also have bombed other villages. This is illustrated London News, again with a wonderful illustration, fantasy illustration of ships of the air attack the ships of the desert. Wonderful journalism. British aeroplanes dropping bombs on a Senussi camel convoy laden with ammunition in March 1916. So where were the Senussiyya at that point? We have some photographs as well as this. I can still show some photographs, very vague, that these are not high resolution photographs, I'm sorry. But there are many soldier albums still preserved in Australia, in Britain, with some snapshots of the desert campaigns. And we can get some information there about the expeditions to Dakhla, about chasing the Senussiyya out, and from these albums. But let me move to Dakhla now, because there were 3 places where the Senussiyya was actually housed. There was Sayyid Ahmed was in Rashta, but the army of the Senussi was in Tanida, in the eastern end of the oasis, so close to the route to Kharga, so at the extremity of the Dakhleh Oasis in the east. The main Senussiyya center was actually in the west, close to Al Qasr. This is Al Qasr, well known to most of you, I trust. When you've been to Dakhla, you know Al Qasr. And west of Al Qasr is the village of Mawhub. Mawhub is actually the name of the family Mawhub. Sheikh Mohammed al Mawhub was one of the Senussiyya preachers, a sheikh who came from Libya to Dakhla around 1870 in order to convert the oasis. He was there proselytizing. He married a local woman, he had 3 sons, he settled in Al Qasr, but then he got some land and he settled in Mawhub, later that became the village of Mawhub named after him. So his sons also received a well, and he sort of set up this area to the west of Al Qasr for his sons and for himself, digging new wells, organizing new agricultural fields, and he became very successful there. His son Ahmed, also an Ahmed, succeeded him as head of the Senussiyya in Dakhla when the Senussiyya became then overrun basically by the large forces of Sayyid Ahmed from Libya. So so you have Sayyid Ahmed, the head of the Senussiyya, and a local Ahmed, then the head of the Senussiyya in Dakhla. And this is interesting that this part of the oasis was in the hands of the Senussiyya, and it is close to the temple of Deir al-Hagar, which is just here, just south of Mawhub, at walking distance from Mawhub. The temple of Deir al-Hagar, which you see here in 1908 at that time, photographed by Winlock, was still buried in its own debris. It was still a wonderful romantic ruin, if you like. Only the sanctuary room at the back had been excavated by a German expedition in 1874. And there are graffiti here from the time um, of the events in 1916 and just before. Here we have a relief which used to be in the sanctuary room with one of the stones that were exposed there by the German expedition. And on it, a large graffito has been written in Arabic by El Khuli, Hakem Dar Asyut. It says 1915. And the same man, this El Khuli, also wrote his name on the entrance portico into the temple. Here you have him, El Khuli Hakem Dar Asyut. Hakem Dar Asyut, he was the chief of police of the time of 1915, apparently, and Dakhleh Oasis resorted under the Mudiriya, the administrative district of Asyut at the time, which explains why the chief of police was sent out to Dakhleh in 1915. This graffito and the other one that I just showed you was made in late December 1915 when the Senussiyya had attacked Siwa, was coming down into Egypt as part of their advance along the northern western coast and then coming down to Siwa and Bahariya. At that time, the Hakamdar of Asyut, the chief of police, came to check on the oasis and he left his name here. Who was Mr. Al Khuli? Well, we know him. He is Syed Fuad Al Khuli. I found him in some books in the NVIC in the Dutch Institute in Cairo, where there are several books describing officials at this time, and he was a very successful official with a long career afterwards. This was one of his early posts to Asyut when he came to Dakhleh. He came to Dakhleh and left his name in the temple, but at the same time, we have another graffito from 1915 of Dr. Ibrahim Zaki. He left his name at the door into the sanctuary room, and he was the Mamour of Dakhleh, the mayor of Dakhleh, the governor of Dakhleh, who had been in this position since July 1915. So apparently the two went together. When the chief of police came, the Mamour, the Ibrahim Zaki, went with him. They both went to Deir al-Hagar temple and left their names there. You can get a wonderful story reconstructed out of these graffiti. And apart from these two from 1915, most of the graffiti in Deir al-Hagar, there are about 100 Arabic graffiti. Most of these are of soldiers, Egyptian soldiers, that left their name there after the events of 1916, so mainly from 1917. And these soldiers came to Dakhleh after the Senussiyya had been chased out. What happens? The British are opposing or trying to stop the Senussiyya coming into Kharga, but at the same time, at a certain moment, the Senussiyya themselves have overstayed their welcome and they decide it's time to go back north. They leave the oasis, and then the British notice that they are packing up and moving back north, and then the British come and follow them. It's not very heroic. They follow the Senussi. They still capture some Senussi that are still behind, and but Syed Ahmed is already back north, and only some soldiers of the Senussi are then captured. Afterwards, the oasis of Dakhleh is liberated in this non-heroic manner. And then the British post some soldiers there, and they post Egyptian soldiers to control the oasis and restore law and order there. And that's the soldiers who have left their names in Deir al-Hagar. The Senussi center of Mawhub is destroyed. The mosques are confiscated. Many of the Senussi have left, and what's left of it is then officially closed down. Said Ahmed has then gone back to Farafra, to Bakharia, where there are British soldiers, but they don't capture Said Ahmed. He goes back to Siwa, where in the end there is a major confrontation between the British and the Senussiyya, which in the end the Senussiyya have to leave Egypt. And that is the end of the story. It took about a year. It took 25,000 British soldiers that were occupied all of the time in the southern western desert, but there were also soldiers in the north, in Siwa. In all, there were some 40,000 troops employed in the western desert for the larger part of 1916. And this is quite incredible. The point about this that 1916 is the worst year of the First World War in Europe. It's the time of the trenches, of Verdun, of all the major bloodshed that happens there. The troops were badly needed in Europe. The troops were badly needed also in Palestine to fight the Ottoman troops. So there were some initial successes along the northern coast, but then you see that the army is then unable to continue their momentum. They cannot chase the Senussiyya and fight them. They're too afraid. They try to throw bombs on Bahariya and Dakhla, but as we know from recent events, an ideology is not defeated with violence. The larger fear that's behind this is that the British had bad experiences in Sudan. And I think that's still something to bring into your memory. The British were terrified about the Mahdist uprising. In Sudan, there was an uprising of an Islamist group that chased the British out, and they killed Gordon. The British were terrified that this scenario would be repeated and that the Senussi would be able to come into the Nile Valley and be welcomed by the local population, and that it would turn against the British and they would also lose Egypt in a major revolt. So they were afraid and they had these troops tied down in order to stop the Senussiyya, whereas the Senussiyya was a small band of Libyan Bedouins. They could easily have been defeated, but it didn't happen. So I find this quite a remarkable story. It's a story about the end of the British colonial presence in Egypt, of course. It is the time when just before Egypt gains independence, 1922, the whole movement towards independence from colonial rule follows on these years of the First World War, and you see how disastrous they were, and how the British soldiers were here tied down, not able to do anything, bored stiff out in the desert posts, whereas the enemy was largely imaginary. Still, this event it has been largely frustrating for the British, of course, and I must say it has been largely forgotten. This part of Egyptian history is overshadowed clearly by other events happening in the First World War, but still the presence of the Senussiyya, of this major Sufi order in Egypt for such a long time, is not mentioned in any of the books. It's a part of recent history of life in the Oasis, where also quite some violence is involved. That has been largely forgotten, and I was very glad that in the end, I could find many travelogues, stories of individual soldiers who were stationed there, books in Arabic, but also in German, in English, many different languages and from many different places to reconstruct part of this history. I don't think I've reconstructed everything that is possible to reconstruct, but at least I've done a bit. The story, if you want to read more, is published in the latest volume of Oasis Papers. And this is published in the memory of Fred Leemhuis, who was a great friend and a great inspiration for me. And I was very glad to dedicate this story about modern Dakhla, also involving El Qasr, which is where Fred Leemhuis worked, to his memory. So this is my story, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Olaf, for that great presentation. It's fascinating how you can sort of dig up such a sort of It's a great story and sort of the pearls you can uncover through, you were saying through oral history, right? Like this, you
It
know,
started out with oral history,
exactly.
with stories that people were telling in Dakhleh and about roads made by the British and about
Yeah.
the bombing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's great. So thank you very much. I have a number of questions myself. So we're opening up the floor now for the next 10 minutes or so to Q&A. So if you do have any questions, do either put them in the chat or raise your hand, and I'll give you the floor. And I'll get things started. Why why was Dakhleh, in your opinion, I mean, maybe we don't know the answer to this, but why was it not as, let's say, fanatical or as open to the Senussiyya movement as the other Oasis?
It's an interesting point. I see parallels also with with Dakhleh in more recent years. It seems it has um, um, never been as fanatical as influenced, maybe because there are less Bedouin people living in the oasis. The Bedouin, the Aulad Ali, the tribes of the Bedouin living in the Western Desert tend to be more closely following Islam because they trace their origins back to Saudi Arabia. And Dakhla has a Bedouin population, but it's a minor part of the population. Most of them are farmers, and they're not so concerned.
Okay. No, it's interesting. Thank you. Um, So that was my first question. Again, if anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to add them to the chat or to raise your hands. I will see if you raise your hand. If you don't know how to raise your hand in the Zoom meeting, it's under the react symbol. You can just click raise hand, and I will give you the floor. Why? So you said that the Camel Corps of the British Army was made up of Australians and New Zealanders?
Yeah,
Is there a
yeah.
particular reason for that? I mean, the Australians I can sort of get because they have a big desert, right? But
They have
is
big deserts. They have camels, and
there?
I don't know. I don't know really
Okay.
why they were particularly suitable, but they did, and apparently I've also read that they did a lot of this mapping as well, the Camel Corps, but also in the cars, and they made the first maps of the Western Desert. Well, the survey of Egypt did as well, but
Yeah.
with the cars they could do much more. And and I've read that there are many Australian place names, sort of in the various hills and features of the Western
Okay.
Desert landscape. I must research that further.
Yes.
I have no examples of that, but I read
Your
that you
next
can
research.
see the origin of some of the place names. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Great. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's a nice little tidbit. Very good. I see Pavel has raised his hand, so I'll give you the
Yeah,
floor, Pavel.
yeah. Thank you, Olaf. Indeed, a fascinating topic. Do we know where did the British soldiers stay in Dakhla? Where did they camp? Do we have any remains of such camps? Do you
They
know
didn't
anything about
really,
it?
yeah, the British soldiers stayed in Al Qasr, and there is a certain moment they chase the Senussi who have already left with motor cars. They get stuck in the sand, and they have to wait until the camels catch up, and it's a slow move through Dakhla. Um, um, I know they camped for a few days at Boutkhulu, um, and then the Camel Corps went on to Al Qasr and beyond. But so there were camps, but never for very long, never intensive camps. But at Tanida, there was a major camp for the Senussiyya. They must have camped there, which I don't know where, and I don't know if they left any rock art, any presence there in remains in the rock art. Um, but that's something. Of course, we have some English names. We have some names of soldiers also on the Darb al-Ghubari, between Kharga and Dakhla. There are some soldiers' names. I can imagine that we can find more.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello. Am I in the chat?
Uh, please ask your question. Yeah.
Yeah. Olaf, yes. I just wanted to
Yeah.
Say firstly, thank you very much for this fascinating lecture. It traces, of course, in Dakhleh folklore. And I recorded by Shandy a poem about this event, and it's published somewhere in a festschrift for Peter Petrovich, who you don't know, I think. But it's published, and I'll send it to you as soon as possible when I'm returning. I'm in the hospital at the moment. And
Yeah.
as soon as I return home, I'll send it to you, Olaf. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much again.
Good, good. Thank you. That's great.
Awesome, thank you. If there's any other questions, do again either raise your hand or place them in the chat. Do we know why Gaddafi raised like destroyed Jarboub?
That has to do with the royal family of Libya, the family of King Idris, who Gaddafi replaced him after a revolution. Idris was again a family member of the Senussi family. So there is a direct link from Mohammed al-Senussi to King Idris. And so anything to do with the Senussiyya was banned and destroyed. And that is already after the First World War events. There was an international agreement between Egypt and Libya what to do with the Senussiyya, and they decided to close the mosques. In Egypt, certainly, although some of the mosques managed to survive into the 30s or so, there were still some Senussi mosques, but not anymore. But in Libya, with the arrival of Gaddafi, that was really the end. And also the monuments, like the tomb of Mohammed al-Senussi in Jarboub was destroyed, but also all the other mosques that were once there. So I don't think there's anything left of this.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat, but also forgotten by British administrators. Might there still be some information on this episode in British Army archives?
Yes, I'm sure there is more. As I said, there are many individual memoirs of soldiers who served in the desert. And I think it would be worth going through the archives in London, the army archives to find more specifically about this story. The Senussiyya is usually described from the perspective of Libya, and because that's what the center was. But the Egyptian side of the whole conflict is not. That's always been forgotten about. It's whereas it's interesting because it involves the British and the whole situation that I inscribed, which is completely different from the Libyan history. Yeah.
Is there a pattern to the locations where people added their graffiti in the Western Desert, or was it just, there's a temple, you added graffiti?
I find that really intriguing. It's the Deir el-Hagar temple clearly has to do with the location of Mawhub and the center of the Senussiyya. And so when the Egyptian army was posted there, the Senussiyya had left. Ahmed al-Mawhub, the son, had also been forced to leave, and so these houses were available. The soldiers were settled in that area, and which was next to the temple of Deir el-Hagar. So they simply went out there for picnics, whatever, and left their names there. That's I think what happens there. And the other major concentrations of graffiti from this time is in Garga, in El Deir, where some of the soldiers were stationed, but also in Bagawat. And that intrigues me because Bagawat was not used specifically by the army for habitation, for camp, but it was close to a camp. That it was walking distance. So I think it was again something, boredom, soldiers taking a day out and seeing the sights. And it was easy to scratch your name there in the plaster. That makes it also, it invites people to write graffiti.
It seems to be a sort of unifying, I guess, experience of the human experience in a way that over thousands of years people just have this need to just scribble their name down.
Yeah.
Just wherever they go.
No longer to be encouraged, but
yes.
but from 1916, I think they're actually quite interesting. Yeah.
Yes. Albert, I see.
Yeah, it just reminded me indeed of the much older graffitos signed on one of the well, some of the rock art that were probably put there by bored Egyptian soldiers in the old
Right.
kingdom who
Yes,
were guarding
yes.
against the Libyans back then.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's
There's
of
an
all ages.
interesting
And
link.
soldiers being bored in the desert, they got up to very little. And but one of the things is to write their names. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I have one more question. So again, if anybody else has questions, do feel free to use this last opportunity to either raise your hand or to jot them down on the in the chat. You were talking about the mapping of the Western Desert, and we saw a lot of photographic material that was taken. Did any of this photographic material acquired during the military campaigns have an impact in the field of sort of archaeology, Egyptology of the Western Desert?
Very little, actually. I feel that there might be some of the records, some of the maps done then, which could still be useful, but which simply have not been noticed so far. I feel that there might be more in the archives that could be useful. Of course, for aerial photography, we have since used better army photographs. The Dakhleh project has based itself on photographs from the 50s, which were much higher quality. But still, I think a lot of the army presence, they could have documented some of the material around them, and which we just don't know about it. Yeah.
Okay, great. But definitely something to delve into then.
Yeah.
Maybe a further, a further research question. Well, listen, this is I don't see unless there are any other questions. Albert has written if there are aerial photos from 1916, they could be compared to later ones from the 30s onwards. Indeed, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
that would be very interesting.
definitely worth diving into the archive, seeing what's hidden there. Again, it's just fascinating what you can unravel from oral local history. It really is very great. Well, yeah, listen, thank you very much, Olaf, for this really fascinating lecture, and thank you to everybody who participated. Um, Again, this is part of our series this year, so there'll be more webinars coming later on in the year. So do keep an eye out. Do check out, as I said, our crowdfunding campaign and our social media presence and post, and do what people do on social media. Yeah, so thank you very much, everybody, and wish you all a good night.